Good evening. The headlines tonight, Thursday, the 31st of August, 1939. The Royal Navy has been mobilised. The fleet is now at maximum war readiness. Other reserves are being called up. The evacuation will begin tomorrow. 3 million people are to leave our cities. Silence from Berlin. Hitler has not replied to the British warning on Poland. The government has declared it a crime to hoard food, but some housewives have beaten them to it.
In the last war, I queued up for hours, waiting for 4 ounces of butter. This time, my cupboard is filled.
And the Belgian bridge, which was detonated by lightning. 10 people have been killed. Britain's servicemen and her civilians have been ordered to make ready for war. The Royal Navy has been fully mobilised, and the remainder of the Regular Army Reserve and members of the Royal Air Force Reserve are being called up. Officers and men should stand by for instructions. The evacuation of children, pregnant women and the disabled from London and the other cities and towns will begin early tomorrow. Some 3 million people will be on the move. Many roads out of London will be running one way only. We'll bring you the details in a moment. But first, a report from our diplomatic editor, Christopher Lee.
At 4 o'clock this afternoon, Downing Street announced that the Royal Navy is to complete immediately its mobilisation programme started a month ago. And the remainder of the regular army, reserve and supplementary reserve, together with more RAF volunteers, are to be called up. The RAF is calling up ground-based volunteers. Although much attention and glamour surround pilots and aircraft, large numbers of ground crews are essential to keep the squadrons in the air. But the main element of Number 10's statement concerns the Royal Navy. The Navy's plans are well advanced and many of their ships are either at sea or ready to go. All Class B and D men of the Royal Fleet Reserve are to report to their depots without waiting for further instructions. For example, men of the submarine service will go immediately to Fort Blockhouse at Gosport in Hampshire. At the start of this year, the Navy had fewer than 119,000 officers and ratings. This full mobilisation will bring that total closer to 200,000. That figure doesn't include the 1,600 Wrens, who will expect major reinforcements if they're to take over existing shoreside jobs normally done by sailors, many of whom are now on their way to join the seagoing fleet.
The evacuation of the cities and towns in England and Scotland vulnerable to air attack is to begin in the morning. But the government is stressing that the decision to begin the evacuation does not mean that war is inevitable. A report from Paul Burden.
The evacuation plan calls for the biggest voluntary movement of population ever undertaken anywhere. Up to 3 million predominantly young evacuees like these will be moved to safer areas within the space of 4 days. School children will make up over half the total number evacuated, and more than 100,000 teachers will accompany them. The next largest group will be mothers with children under school age, up to 1 million in all. Pregnant women, the disabled and the blind will also qualify for evacuation. Health Minister Walter Elliott said tonight that it was only a precaution, but it would make tremendous demands on the patient's skill and especially the cheerfulness of the whole nation. Apart from London, at least 30 other centres are being evacuated, including major towns on the Thames and Medway estuaries, ports on the south coast, all major industrial cities in the Midlands and the north, and in Scotland, Edinburgh, Glasgow and Dundee. 72 underground stations in London will be closed to the general public for up to 9 hours. The bulk of the capital's bus fleet has been requisitioned for the operation. With congestion already building up on the roads, 9 major trunk routes will become restricted to one-way traffic out of town. In country areas, billeting officers have the experience of the evacuation exercise carried out last year to help them in the search for 3 million emergency beds. The county of Kent is ready for an influx of 150,000 and Leicestershire up to 50,000. As the children of London enjoy their last night at home, Herbert Morrison, the leader of the London County Council, had this message for them. Please do all you can to make things run smoothly. Above all, be kind to each other in any little difficulties that arise. Good luck and a safe return to dear old London.
Paul Burden, and we'll be following the progress of the evacuation tomorrow. Well, so far there has been no official reply from the German government to the note sent by Britain last night. Our government is understood to have warned Herr Hitler once more against invading Poland. Otherwise, Britain would be compelled to honour its obligations to defend that country. In the past few minutes, we've been getting reports that German radio is broadcasting Hitler's response. And we're going over now to our correspondent Charles Wheeler in Berlin.
Berlin radio, at this moment, is broadcasting what is described as a 16-point proposal for a settlement with Poland. Germany's terms include the immediate unconditional transfer of Danzig to the Reich and a plebiscite in the Polish corridor under international supervision. But the broadcast, of which this is a transcript, says these are the proposals Germany would have made if Poland had sent a fully empowered negotiator to Berlin by midnight last night. Since none came, Germany considers its proposals to have been rejected. Foreign observers here are describing the German move as unprecedented in the history of modern diplomacy. They point out that the Polish ambassador, Mr. Lipski, was handed the proposals only an hour before the broadcast. As for the British ambassador, he was given a verbal version of the proposals by Foreign Minister Ribbentrop last night, but was refused a written copy on the ground that the proposals were no longer of any importance. Also tonight, Berlin radio claims that Polish irregular troops have crossed the border into German Silesia, where they've attacked a radio station at Gleiwitz. In Moscow, following a speech to the Supreme Soviet by the Foreign Minister, Mr. Molotov, the Soviet Union has ratified last month's Russian-German non-aggression pact. This follows yesterday's TASS announcement that 500,000 Soviet troops have taken up positions on Poland's eastern frontier. Poland is therefore surrounded.
Poland's mobilization is gathering speed. All men up to the age of 40 have been called up amid growing signs that this country can no longer back away from war. It can only be a matter of hours before the armed forces conscript everyone between the ages of 17 and 60, and they've given warning that all personal property is now subject to requisition. There's some surprise here that the Germans have not yet annexed the city of Danzig. That, though, still seems likely. Many polls point to the strength of their armed forces, their alliance with Britain and France, and they feel Germany would have little chance of winning a war. Despite that, the government has taken fresh emergency measures. The post, telegraph and telephone services are in the hands of the military, as well as the railways and radio station. Anyone who wants to travel must obtain an official permit. At the moment, the capital is calm. Plenty of private traffic and food is plentiful. That's in marked contrast to the scenes reported in Danzig, with more arrests of Polish nationals, while others hurry to leave the city. To all intents and purposes, the port is in German hands. If war comes, it's likely to start here.
Here at home, the government has now made food hoarding illegal. Following the appeal to housewives earlier this week not to buy more than usual, a statutory limit has now been imposed. No household should store more than 1 week's supply of any food, tea, coffee and cocoa included. The announcement has been made in a special information film just released about how to cope in the crisis.
Avoid panic buying. There are plenty of food supplies in the country. Those who have laid in an emergency food supply should not consume it now. Continue to obtain your normal supplies from your usual shops.
The government insists that food supplies are adequate, that warehouses are still well stocked with meat and grain, and that imports are still coming in. But some housewives we talked to this morning were reluctant to be reassured.
Any housewife who thinks she needn't bother to lay in a store of food is living in a fool's paradise. In the last war, I queued up for hours, waiting for 4 ounces of butter. This time, my cupboard is filled.
The government film goes on to describe the domestic precautions we should all take.
Clear your loft of all junk to minimize risk of fire. Have buckets of water and sand on every landing. If you have no sand, use dry earth. Always keep your gas mask handy in the house. If war should come, never go out without it. Note down official instructions, otherwise you might forget them. Keep pencil and paper by your wireless set.
All telephone services with overseas countries and ships at sea have been suspended, and there are likely to be long delays on all telegram services. In Whitehall, the King has been to the Admiralty. Everywhere in Britain, people have been busy with their duties, as our Home Affairs correspondent David Sells reports.
Today's mobilisation of the fleet was marked by the King's visit to the Admiralty to tour secret staff and chart rooms, inspecting the deep underground shelters. The Duke of Kent was with him. Civil flying was today severely restricted. Night flights were banned for British and foreign aircraft alike. All flying will have to be at an altitude of between 1,000 and 3,000 feet. Aerial photography is forbidden. Almost all of eastern England has been declared a prohibited area, along with our island's major naval bases. Planes disobeying regulations may be shot down after due warning, the Air Ministry said. The government ordered ARP regional organisations onto a war footing and instructed local authorities to set up their own ARP emergency committees. Policemen in London have swapped helmets for tin hats, and tin-hatted, they were on hand today to assist aliens queuing to find out where they'll stand should war be declared between Britain and Germany. Youngsters in a London suburb today joined the sandbagging crusade. It is no respecter of persons. Volunteers, both rich and poor, are helping out. At one hospital, medical students were doing the heavy work, and, as students will, they'd made proper provision for a summer's day. A handful of London cabs have been equipped to haul trailer pumps for the auxiliary fire service. Improvisation is the order of the day.
David Sells. Other news now. 10 people have been killed and 50 injured when lightning struck a bridge in Belgium as 2 trains travelled across it. The bridge over the River Meuse near Liege in the south of the country had been heavily mined in case of war. The dynamite was detonated by the flash of lightning just as the Cologne Express and a local passenger train were travelling across. The 2 engine drivers are among the dead, 6 soldiers, passengers on the trains, and 2 military engineers who were guarding the bridge. 2 other older bridges nearby collapsed as a result of the explosion, which smashed doors and windows over a radius of a mile. Here, £10,000 worth of banknotes in transit from 2 London banks disappeared at Hitchin in Hertfordshire early today. The notes were in a mailbag which was to be picked up by automatic grabber and landed in a net. But the mechanism had been tampered with during the night. Police believe the missing £10,000 could constitute one of the cleverest robberies in the history of the post office. In the city, the stock exchange will be closed tomorrow during the evacuation of London. Figures today from the Bank of England show that an extra £21.5 million was withdrawn from Britain's banks in the week which ended yesterday. The pound has fallen 11 cents. It closed tonight at $4.28.5. The price of gold rose 6p to close at 159 shillings an ounce. Finally, the latest news once again. In Germany tonight,